Check. Okay. For the next little bit here, we're just going to look at keyframing, how to keyframe the various parameters in color. And let's remember we can keyframe in the primary, in the secondaries. You can keyframe primary out. I need to look into keyframing color effects. I thought you could keyframe these, but let's just focus on the primary in and secondaries right now. The thing to remember about keyframing in color is that it creates a snapshot of the entire primary in room. If I'm keyframing the primary in, it takes all of the parameters. These here, the advanced parameters, and these midtone shadow, highlight, hue, saturation, luminosity. It does not keyframe curves, okay? That is something to consider. I can't keyframe any of these parameters here in the primary in, but the rest of them over here, they are all keyframed, all of them at the same time. So let's look at this shot and we'll create a keyframe. If you remember this from class, it's this house, and as we sort of swoop down, we will notice that the exposure, once we get to the bottom here, the last frame, oops, this last frame, it looks a little dark. So maybe what we want to do is raise the shadow highlight a little bit, the shadow area. Let's raise the exposure just a tad. And that looks good. And maybe push the shadows towards a little green so that that grass looks a little green. And because we've increased the shadow, that's going to bleed, that green hue is going to bleed all the way over a little bit into the highlights. Definitely it's affecting the midtone a little bit, but you know what I want to do is push the highlights in the opposite direction just a little bit, just to counteract that green tinge to get the sky towards blue. And here's how you add a keyframe. So I've made this adjustment on the last frame because that's where I want the shot to look like the last frame. So what I'll do is hit Control 9. All right, and we'll notice that down at the bottom here on our timeline, we've got a track here, and this is P1, standing for primary in, or I guess PI, primary in. And we have this little bar here. This is a keyframe, and it just keyframed everything. There's no way to see individual keyframes for each individual parameter. There's just too many of them. So they just keyframed everything in one block. Let's remember that. So now let's back up our shot, and let's go to the first frame. Here we are at the beginning. I just hit the, hit the up key. I'm at the first frame, and what I need to do is correct, go back to the original correction here. So I'll hit this, reset button. I can just say reset primary in, and you'll notice that nothing is happening. It's not resetting anything. It's leaving it exactly where it was. That's because once I introduce a keyframe, I can't adjust any parameters unless the playhead is sitting on a keyframe. And then when I do the adjustment, it adjusts the parameters for that keyframe. So in order to make an adjustment, I got to add a keyframe. So Control 9, I've added a keyframe at the beginning. Now I can reset all primary in, so I can go back to my original exposure. And you'll notice that from this keyframe, it creates this little curve, okay? This is how color is translating or interpolating from this keyframe to that keyframe. And it's doing so using a smooth interpolation. I've got some other options here. I can change that interpolation if I park my playhead. If I park my playhead on the first keyframe, I have to be on that keyframe in order to change the interpolation that follows it. Now let's say I had several keyframes here. Like for instance, if I went here and I hit Control 9, that would add a keyframe. So in order to, I could change this interpolation by being parked on this keyframe right here. I could change the interpolation afterwards until it hits the next keyframe. If I want to change the interpolation before it, I have to go to the keyframe before it. Now I'm going to get rid of that keyframe because I don't want that keyframe. How do I change the interpolation? Well, I just go up here to Timeline and where is the no, it's in Edit. No. Well, I don't know. Control 8, it changes it. Okay, I don't know where the menu option is. Control 8. So they're smooth. That's linear. That means it's going to make a constant transition from keyframe A to keyframe B. This is, it stays constant. Well, I just used a constant twice, but this, it means that the settings in the keyframe, this first keyframe is going to stay the same until it reaches the next keyframe and then suddenly change from one keyframe to the next. And this is smooth. It eases out of the keyframe, it speeds up, and then it slows down as it reaches the next keyframe, as it translates or interpolates from the first keyframe to the last. So let's look at this. I hit the playhead, and we see as it drops down, we end up in that last frame. Let me go back to and toggle my playback setting. That way, now it just plays back. This loops this clip over and over. So there we go. It's panning down. Important here, I shouldn't see the effect. All right. But I do want to make an adjustment. I don't think I need. The exposure is all good until the house really starts to appear in the shot, and that's where the exposure starts to look kind of dark. So I don't want to change the exposure for this first chunk. I want the exposure to start to change from about this point to the end of the clip. So what I want to do is drag this keyframe, drag this keyframe to this frame there, and let's back up and let's just see this all over again. Good, and right, looks great to me. It looks a lot better. And that's basically keyframing in a nutshell. I can keyframe other parameters. For instance, I could keyframe I could create a Luma mat and then and keyframe certain parameters in there. I mean, however you want to do it. In the secondaries room, I can keyframe in any one of these rooms. I can create a keyframe here. I go to the second room, I can create another keyframe. I can go to a third secondary. I can't keyframe these curves, okay? Just like in primary in, I can't keyframe these. I can't keyframe the hue curve, the saturation curve, or the luma curve. That won't, that's not keyframeable. You'll notice, for instance, what I'll do is I'll go to my, well, I'll just, create a keyframe. I'll hit Control 9. That's going to create a keyframe in my secondaries. Now, if this was keyframeable, and I put my playhead somewhere not on a keyframe, when I adjust this curve, it should snap back. It shouldn't let me adjust it because it's not on a keyframe. But watch. I can adjust it. That means it's not actually in the keyframe. It's not keyframeable. Okay? So, let's not worry about, well, see, it won't let me enable this thing because I'm not parked on it on the keyframe. If I want to go to a keyframe, there's a shortcut. if I'm on the track that I want that the keyframe I want to adjust, if I right click and select previous keyframe, oh, it's not doing it because I'm not on that track. Previous keyframe. So I have this particular clip highlighted. If I right click, I can select next keyframe, previous keyframe, or delete all keyframes if I want. Okay, here I'm parked on the keyframe. Now I can enable it. It's going to let me enable it, and of course I can make adjustments here. I'm doing just weird stuff just so that you can see what's going on. And it's going to play this. Now I could, what I'll do is I'll add another keyframe, Control 9. All right, and then I'm going to make an adjustment to this curve. And I think what you'll notice is that it doesn't change. Okay, it's not changing. These curves aren't keyframeable. But of course, in the secondary, this is keyframeable, and any of these parameters are keyframeable, and your vignette and your alpha matte, this is all keyframeable. So, the pulling an HSL qualifier, you can't. I don't think you can change that over time. I mean, heck, let's see. Let's see if we can. Let me go back to this. Let me disable this. Let me go to this first in room. I'm going to delete all. Okay. I just hit delete all and it didn't delete these keyframes. The reason is because I changed which secondary I was in. This is keyframes for secondary 3. So I need to go to the 3 tab and then I can delete all of them. Boom. It's gone. This program's, pretty complicated and, has some definite idiosyncrasies to it. Okay, you'll notice that I've already created a matte here. So I'm going to keyframe it. Let's go. There's 1. I'll click down here. There's 2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to change the parameter of this key and see if it changes over time. Okay. So I just did that, and I just did this, and there's no... Okay, I just changed the matte. So let's see what happens as I go back. You'll notice that the matte just changed. So the HSL qualifier, those parameters can change with time. Pretty cool. Okay, that's all for keyframing. You can of course you can keyframe the matte. I guess I should show you that as well. Okay, let me show you the matte. That's kind of important to be able to keyframe a vignette. So here's the vignette. What I'll do is I'm going to delete all my keyframes from this vignette. It didn't do it because I'm not in so that this is shape. So what I need to be in is the geometry tab, because that's where the shape is created, and I'm going to highlight the shape. Now I've got the shape that I created. Here are my keyframes for it, and now I can delete all. Okay, and I can go here and I can detach it, and now I've started over. So I'm going to go back into my secondaries, and I'm going to say, yes, I want to enable this. I want to create a matte, a vignette, and I'm going to make it a user-defined shape. Let me go to square and then go to user-defined shape. Now it pushes me into geometry. And now what I can do is just start drawing my shape. So I'm going to just isolate this ocean here. And just make it real quick. Make some strange noises to maybe make this a little less boring to watch me do this. And I will close the shape, and there I have my matte. And as I scrub this, you'll notice that, oh my gosh, it's not really going to stay where I want it. So let me start with frame 1, and let me adjust my matte in order to move the whole mat at one time, I just grab that little square and I'll drag it up here. And some cool tricks, if I box select a group of points, I can manipulate this point either using this little box, or I can grab the square, little plus sign in the middle and drag it. Let's say I want to adjust this. I'm going to drag this over here this way, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag this over here. And sometimes it helps maintain the integrity of the shape by dragging more than one point at a time. But maybe I'm just saying that because it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. All right, anyway, okay, so I'm going to start with this shape. And I know that this shape works for the first frame, so I'm going to keyframe this. Control 9. Oh, I can't keyframe it. You notice nothing happened because it's not really attached to the. We haven't attached it yet. So I click attach. Now it's actually attached. Now I can keyframe it. All right. Control 9. I keyframed it. So now I have the shape. Let me go ahead and step to the end. All right. There's the end. I'll go back one. All right. Where'd my mat go? Well, when I jumped off of this clip, it deselected the mat. Now that I'm back on the clip, I click the latest vignette shape here, and it brings it back up. I can try to drag this thing, but you notice that it's going to snap back because I got to create a keyframe. So Control 9, I got a keyframe at the end. Now what I'll do is I'll drag this down and I'll adjust the shape so that it works. That works for me. Oops. Oh, dang it. You'll notice that some of these points are off the screen here. Let me see. Shift, Apple. There's a way to actually scale this, and I'm not, well, I can middle mouse click and move this around, but there's a way to scale it and I forget what it is. Anyway, so I'm going to select these points and I'm going to move this down a little bit. Okay, so that works for me. And now when I play this thing, it should all look beautiful. So let's check it out. Oh, I got to select it again because I jumped off the clip. So it seems to not really follow it well. What I do is I'm just going to add more keyframes. So I can go right here in the middle. I add a keyframe, and then I drag it down and change my shape, and I'll just work this whole thing. Just keep working this mat. I might jump here and go, yeah, it's still off, so I'll create another keyframe, and I will move it, and, all right, I might click over here, and, that actually looks okay. So, I just sort of scrub this thing. There, not okay. Control 9, create a keyframe, drag this down, and then keep on scrubbing. There, it's off. Control 9. So I'll just kind of keep working this. It's you really want to kind of create as few keyframes as possible, actually, and that might take a little practice figuring out the best way to manipulate this thing in order to create as few keyframes as possible. But don't be fooled by the fact that this thing, the shape updates slower than the clip. So you just, once we get to this keyframe, it looks like, my shape is off a bit. So I'm going to select these and drag it up like that. Okay. Oop, I'm not on the keyframe. Previous. All right, now I'm on the keyframe, and I'm going to adjust the shape again. Okay, now that looks a lot better. And there you have it. I can jump back to my secondaries. You'll see that there's the keyframe. You'll see there's the shape, and as we scrub it, it does the trick. And just to review what this vignette is actually doing is On the inside of the vignette, which is what I cut out, this ocean, I've pushed everything towards blue to make the ocean bluer. When I switch to outside, it's now everything outside the vignette is pushed towards yellow. The midtones pushed towards yellow to kind of give this an effect. You'll notice that when I drew this thing, I didn't set any sort of softness. If I try to do softness now, it's not going to let me do it because, well, I'm not on a keyframe. So let me go ahead and move to a keyframe. And then I can adjust the softness here. But if I jump to the next keyframe, you'll notice that it goes back to not softness. So I'd actually, if I wanted to add softness, I'd have to go to every keyframe and add that value in there. Remember, this keyframe keyframes all the parameters in this particular room at the same time. So, all the parameters, if I didn't adjust any parameters, they're all set to 0. And they're locked at 0 until I change them. So, anyway, all right, that's keyframing. I'm done. Next up, tracking tool.